Paco Rabanne, now named Rabanne, is one of the most famous brands to come from the 1960s. From groundbreaking no-sew designs to mega hits in Hollywood, the founder created a legacy on which the company still rides today. It's not quite back yet, but it's on the brink. So today I wanted to look over their history and consider how they could use that to make the comeback they really deserve. This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN, Virtual Private Network, keeps your online identity safe by encrypting all of the information sent between your device and the internet. This keeps your personal data protected from big companies or cyber criminals. It also swaps the real location of your device with a new one, allowing you to access content from across the globe. For my family, you may know my partner is Turkish, so a VPN allows us to access content that simply isn't available here. Or even in research for videos like these, sometimes news is geo-locked, so it genuinely comes in handy for such sites, allowing me to provide you with the best quality content. I really do have a lot to thank in VPNs, so if you are interested in trying Surfshark for yourselves, I'll pop a QR code on the screen now, and I'll pop the link surfshark.deals/understitch as a link in the description with my coupon code understitch for an extra 4 months free. Thank you Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Paco Rabanne's extremely quick rise to success was no mistake. According to his autobiography Journey, he quickly perceived that Parisian fashion designers were content to have what he considered to be a taste for the past and was horrified with this nostalgic trend. Instead, he became interested in plastic, rhodoid and aluminium, which had never been used in fashion before. He put needle and scissors aside and took up pliers and blowpipe. He soon put together some experimental models. When he set himself this task, it did not cross his mind that the result would be in any way futuristic. It was simply a little ahead of those who were behind their time. In short, he noticed a gap in the market and he filled it with the collection named 12 Unwearable Dresses in Contemporary Materials, which I assume is exactly what it said on the tin. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any pictures or even a description of what these dresses looked like or were made of definitively. Even Rabanne's own 5-minute history on their YouTube just shows these animations and then follows it with these 3 pictures, which I looked up and are actually dated February 1967. Instead, I actually think it might be these looks that are our best bet at seeing his first collection, as they are actually dated 1966 and they're also made of paper, which may explain the title of the collection. Which, if it is these that started it all, would mark the beginning of 2 major signifiers for the brand: headpieces/hoods and paper used as a constructional material, both of which were widely loved signifiers by the 1960s fashionable press. We'll be coming back to the discs. This is not the first time he's used them. But because Giancarlo Botti, the photographer, as well as Rabanne himself are both past now, there doesn't seem to be any way to confirm definitively that this was the first collection. I did try to contact the brand to ask as well, but obviously I just didn't get a reply from them. Instead, what we can confirm is that whatever the first collection was, it was a sensation. His clothes struck a chord with American fashion editors as well as celebrities, and they were soon being worn by Françoise Hardy, Brigitte Bardot, and Jane Birkin, already affording the fledgling designer global acclaim from just his first show. And this fame would climb quickly. Only a short 2 months later, on the 21st of April 1966, he presented his second show. I believe it was named Mech Art and saw Rabanne break many established couture boundaries. Firstly, it's often credited as being the first fashion show with music. Secondly, it was made up of these beachwear garments fabricated of leather, or his famous discs. And third, was shown through a striptease performed by Parisian cabaret dancers, which saw that he had successfully created his first scandal. To quote Steele's Encyclopedia of Clothing and Fashion, Paco Rabanne was pushing the limits of clothing design, and the post-World War II baby boomers were in the throes of a vibrant youth culture centered on fashion and music. Consumers accepted the notion of cheap, throwaway clothing as they embraced disposable cutlery, plates, razors, napkins, lighters, and pens. This, of course, all started from these two initial collections that were also throwaway. So literally from the very beginning, there was a rejection of traditional materials in his work, and yet was still able to be considered couture, firstly because of the high quality, but also because of his previous proximity to couture. You see, way back in his childhood, before the Spanish Civil War, his mother had been a chief seamstress for Balenciaga's first salon in Spain. And during the Spanish Civil War, when Rabanne was 5, she also helped set up Balenciaga's first French maison as well. Then, by his own teen years, Rabanne was already making money sketching and designing for various couture houses like Nina Ricci, Dior, Givenchy, etc., under the name Frank Rabanne. Following this, he had had 2 individual attempts at fashion businesses before his fashion brand. The first one made handmade buttons that were wildly successful both in France and America, introducing Rabanne to the American market, to whom he geared all of his work post-debut. And the second was a jewelry line in 1965, which marks the first time that Rabanne both used metallic rings, plastics including thermoplastics, and rivets in his work, obviously which would both go on to be the biggest signifiers of his newly formed fashion Paco Rabanne brand. Though, full disclaimer, some do believe the jewelry line was the beginning of the Paco Rabanne brand, just because this was the first use of that name professionally. And so, with all of that said, it was obvious how he knew to plan for this first collection. And he did so extremely successfully, literally turning the world of couture design on his head, and was soon seeing comparison to the Dadaists, which is the same art movement Schiaparelli was included in. In fact, still within 1966, his design work was included in art exhibitions alongside artists like Salvador Dali and Lucio Fontana, as due to the construction, they were considered more akin to art than to fashion. Plus, because by this point Schiaparelli's company had closed, I do have a full video on Schiaparelli if you'd like to know why, effectively he had a strong enough differentiator or positioning that none of the other 1960s couturiers had, meaning that his brand was fresh and exciting, the hottest thing in couture. By only the following year, he was already designing for the silver screen on 4 1967 flicks, namely 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, Les Aventuriers, 2 for the Road, and Casino Royale, and in 1968 with one movie, Barbarella. Starring Jane Fonda at the absolute height of her fame, Barbarella was a colossally big hit in cinemas. But technically, Rabanne didn't design the clothes. They were actually designed by French costume designer Jacques Fonterey, manufactured by Santora Ferrani, and only inspired by ideas of Paco Rabanne. And yet that didn't really seem to matter. Rabanne was colloquially connected to the movie because of how close the inspiration was. This then resulted in many fashion insiders still to this day crediting Rabanne with the costume design, including this 2019 article by Jean-Paul Gaultier. In fact, today, there are whole academic journals, such as this one from Elizabeth Castaldo-Dundee, that aim to dispel the myth that continues to prevail. But, as I often say, the truth, even in 1968, doesn't matter. Only the public's perception of the truth matters. And so, because Rabanne was so widely credited with the costumes, it became an impact on how his work was perceived and linked his design language more into the space theme. This would become another signifier that would continue with the brand, but would also open him up to stronger comparisons to competitors like Pierre Cardin, André Courrèges, and even Reed Crawford, who was a milliner, despite the fact that, unlike the other designers, Paco Rabanne never actually aimed to look space age. That was a signifier put onto him by the public that he didn't intend to have. Regardless, he was immediately, within just 2 years of debut, very well respected in the worlds of art, fashion, and film. But of course, his clothing was more or less unwearable. Except for about a year of selling paper dresses to the masses for 15 francs apiece, by definition, his clothes were not easily bought or worn by the average consumer. Of course, he probably could have found a career in costume design, but something far better was on the cards for the company. As in 1968, Paco Rabanne, in a licensing deal with the Spanish company Puig, would release their first fragrance, Calandre. Fragrance in the United States at this time was primarily French and considered a luxury to be worn only on special occasions. Nourel was the first American designer to lend his name to a perfume. Revlon introduced it in 1969, and it catapulted America into the fashion/fragrance arena. This 1969 was the same year that Rabanne launched their first fragrance, evidencing their ability to be right on the cutting edge of what consumers wanted to see, especially in America, where we know his main audience resided. And in turn, this would set the company up with a now standard business model of using film, celebrity, fashion shows as marketing and using perfumes to fund it all. Very quickly, it was obvious that licensing was the best way forward for the brand. It produced so much money for so little effort and could really afford them to continue on their creative path. So, soon after the first perfume launch, a Paco Rabanne diffusion line named Paco was released as another cash cow in licensing. It was more wearable, accessibly priced, and unisex, as well as launched in time for their first store opening in 1972 on la rue de Cherche-Midi, which at this time only sold Paco both for men and women, but not the couture. This was then followed the following year by another perfume, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, in 1973, and then Métal in 1979. In fact, while the diffusion line Paco is barely mentioned in records of Paco Rabanne, it's the fragrances that would become the true backbone of the entire company throughout the 1970s. And yet that didn't mean that they weren't trying to diversify. Come 1980, he was showing actual fabric on the catwalk, genuinely wearable garments amongst the metal, plastic, and paperwork pieces that were still popular. And it was around this time that Rabanne started looking to expand on all of this commercial success by way of more license agreements, capitalizing on the fame that he had earned. To him, this was probably a no-brainer. Licensing was already common in haute couture up until this point, and this new structure popularized in the 1970s-ish hadn't seen any kind of negative aspects just yet. You see, up until the 1960s-ish, licensing was used by couturiers in a totally different sense. They would license their patterns to local seamstresses or even department stores who would make the designs themselves in fabrics that they had in the studio. I think the best example of this that I've covered in a video thus far has been Madeleine Vionnet, who very famously was anti-licensing, but still licensed her designs out to couturiers like Cristobal Balenciaga in Spain before he was famous, which, as a side note, potentially means Paco Rabanne's mum would have sewn a Vionnet garment. This practice was common and prevalent as a way for the couturiers just to stay afloat. It made a lot of money for not a lot of effort. However, by the 1980s, there had come a new wave of licensing that saw a brand sell the name and sometimes a signifier of the brand to a third party who could make whatever they licensed under your name, usually just to a different market. Famously, this happened with Burberry, with Thomas Burberry, Burberry Black and Burberry Blue to Japan and Spain, and was successful at first. It was majorly profitable and truly no effort on the behalf of the designer. So by the 1980s, many brands like Paco Rabanne, Pierre Cardin, and even Yves Saint Laurent were licensing their name out left and right in pursuit of easily made profit. For Rabanne, this saw home furnishings in 1981, a menswear line in the same year that was then re-debuted in 1983, a men's skincare line in 1984, all of which were very successful, and at least 3 of which were produced by Puig, the same company that had produced their fragrance line, which now boasted 7 fragrances. Clearly, Paco Rabanne was a real money spinner for Puig, and at this time there were no perceived negatives to their copious licensing. So, Puig Beauty and Fashion Group purchased the whole company Paco Rabanne in 1986 for an undisclosed amount. Within the next 4 years, they expanded extremely heavily. Women's ready-to-wear in 1990, leather goods in 1991, followed at some point by watches, jewelry, and a ready-to-wear line exclusive to South Korea, which according to the New York Times meant at one point he had signed 140 licenses. But what goes up must come down. And it wasn't long before the licenses began to have a negative effect on the public perception of the business. Though Paco Rabanne himself was still the head designer of the couture, still well involved in the business, still respected as a designer even, the licenses had simply cheapened his brand. He was now too accessible, and the luxury perception of the Paco Rabanne name was beginning to wane. The company combated this by making over the Rue du Cherche-Midi store in 1990 to stock their new women's wear ready-to-wear line, which was a more premium line than the unisex Paco, as well as their premium menswear line as well. But this public perception was not helped by the fact that the company hadn't really designed anything truly new in a very long time, and Paco Rabanne the person had started to make some particularly obscure, kind of apocalyptic predictions in his books, including in 1996's Has the Countdown Begun and in 1999's Le Feu du Ciel, that earned him the name Wacko Paco from The Guardian. In the same year, Rabanne's retirement was announced pretty quickly, and he supposedly stepped away from the company. The Paco diffusion line was shuttered in the following year, and it's often reported that the ready-to-wear lines went on hiatus either in 1999 or in 2000, depending on the source. But while all of that is kind of true, it's also kind of not true, and even the bits that are true didn't last very long. You see, while the couture was wound down after the Spring 99 couture show, the Paco Rabanne ready-to-wear women's wear did continue. And from 2001, Rabanne himself continued to walk out at the end of each show with his assistant Rosemarie Rodriguez. Actually, if I'm being honest, in my opinion, between 2003 and 2004, where he focused down on house codes, it's some of his best work. I think perhaps this has just been lost in translation over time, especially considering by this point, the Paco Rabanne fragrances far outweighed the fashion line in just every aspect. Sales, profits, buzz, all of it. Quote, by the time the century was over, Paco Rabanne was an international fragrance star. This sums up the public perception well. By the end of the millennium, Paco Rabanne was now considered a fragrance line more than it was a fashion house. Realistically, the main line had become far more commercial than it once was. They tried to move on their core signifiers like paper, metal, 1960s space age aesthetics, and all of the others, but frankly, it just didn't translate. And his designs hadn't managed to break out of that box since its popularity began to wane in the 80s. It was long ready for a change, and so Rabanne actually did leave the label with his final collection being ready to wear Spring-Summer 05. In his stead, Patrick Robinson made his debut for the company in Autumn-Winter 05, and things were looking up. Robinson was quite a well-known designer, having just left Perry Ellis and having a very short couple weeks at Thierry Mugler, so he wasn't a new name. But unfortunately, by 2007, during a very serious company restructuring that saw them not ship out the Autumn-Winter 06 collection and put staff on alert that they might be jobless, he was snatched up by Gap to be their artistic director, leaving Paco Rabanne once again without a head designer. It's just this time, the fashion offering from the Paco Rabanne brand actually was put on hiatus, except for this one show in Moscow in Spring-Summer 08 that was designed by this lady whose name I absolutely could not find. They only produced showroom shows of their classic pieces from here on out. The wind down didn't really cause a massive buzz. It wasn't a huge story, no one was interested in the Paco Rabanne label shrinking. So the real surprise came in 2008 with the release of the men's fragrance 1 Million by Paco Rabanne that was an unexpectedly massive success. Totally unlike the prevailing minimalist men's fragrances at the time, it was a sensationally successful launch and brought a whole new wave of interest back to the brand. Eventually, this turned into a relaunch of the ready-to-wear under Manish Aurora for Spring-Summer 12, a collection that was relatively well received, with Mino Mystery for Vogue saying, "What's clear is that Aurora has the spirit and energy down pat, making this an interesting appointment." But the article does also go on to say how all of this will translate to a fashion business for Paco Rabanne isn't entirely clear. And that's really where I am at with this collection as well. It's good in that it connects the old codes of the house, namely futurism and metalwork, really well into 2012 fashions. but it's still kind of unclear why it wasn't evolved further than just a repeat of popular styles of the time and why they went for such an obviously commercial route with it. This was the relaunch of the ready-to-wear, but it didn't have anything about it to be buzzworthy or interesting enough to get writers interested, which is further confusing as the whole concept of using catwalk shows as promotion for the cosmetics was historical to the Paco Rabanne brand and now well established in other companies after being popularized by LVMH in the late 90s, early 2000s. Simply, they would have been better advised to have had a splashier show to bring eyes back towards the brand, at least for the first couple collections undermanaged, just to establish them again in fashion, and obviously sell a few perfumes along the way. By the following year, he was replaced by Lydia Mora for Spring-Summer 13, which got very bad reviews, and again by Julien Dossena for Spring-Summer 14. From this, we can assume it is really the parent company, Puig, that just didn't understand what they wanted the brand to be. All three designers had a different vision. None of them, I think, were explicitly bad, but to the consumer, all of that change is confusing. It means the brand is unable to have the time it needs to create a tribe of interested consumers and stockists because it's not reliable for consumers to return to. With that said, this would change with Dossena. His work seemed to hit the kind of sweet spot they were looking for, and it was under his guidance that they would slowly bring back consumer interest to the brand, allowing for that needed following to build. They also relaunched menswear for Spring-Summer 20, and things seemingly were looking up for the company, slowly growing this tribe over time. He reintroduced elements that Rabanne had introduced himself after he started working with fabrics, things like metallic fabrics and long flowy fabric, while introducing elements like printed and woven patterns and lace. I have to admit that I'm also one of these people. I own this shirt from the Autumn-Winter 21 collection, which you can't really see in the picture, but I love it. It's very well made, 100% cotton, and it's beautiful. However, during this time, because of all these newer elements introduced by Dossena, the one thing that they had lost that had served them so well was consistency. This kind of started in Spring-Summer 15 as he began playing with prints and other things. But since 2018, the brand has been a bit eclectic in its offering. If I just show you one look that Vogue chose to front the brand from each collection from Spring-Summer 18 until their most recent, it's very hard to tell that these looks are from the same brand. They had lost that season-on-season consistency that Dossena was great for between Spring-Summer 14 and 2017. And just to be clear, I'm not saying they can't change up the look if it's not working, but regardless of what look they go for, they need their point of view to be crystal clear so that a customer can buy into it. It's just world building. That said, according to the Financial Times, Paco Rabanne has been doubling revenues from 1.5 billion euros in 2020 to 3 billion euros. Sales are on track to surpass 4 billion in 2023, according to Chief Executive Marc Puig. Of course, we can assume that most of that revenue is from fragrances because it almost always is, but there's clearly growth there. The shows have got bigger and they've added a men's line, so it's not failing at all, even if it could be improved with consistency. However, their trajectory would all change in early 2023 after Francisco Rabanera y Cuervo passed away in February. This was a huge loss for the fashion world, but it wasn't a massive loss for the company. Rabanne had been a bit of a liability for the company for some time due to some of the more out there things that he had said. Even according to their own brand history video, he claimed to have met God, Jesus, aliens, and assassinated Tutankhamun in a previous life. So with all of this, there's obviously risk there, and as horrible as it sounds, his death meant that the risk of him saying something that could genuinely negatively affect the business had been nullified. 4 months later, the whole company underwent a rebrand to simply Rabanne. This was planned to bring everything together under one brand, according to Jerome Leloup, who is the vice president of Rabanne Beauty, and was meant to help the brand enter into a new, distinct era. To quote the brand in a statement to fashionista.com, With this new visual identity, the brand embraces a more refined signature, with the smooth silhouette of the R monogram signaling a confident modern minimalism as the brand enters a chapter. Personally, I don't think much changed design-wise in the collections. They definitely didn't have that minimalism aspect that they're claiming is in the new logo. Nor did they really change anything except the name, to be honest, and it makes me wonder if this was just done to separate themselves from any license agreements that Paco Rabanne had that they simply cannot get out of. So if that is the case, it wasn't a total overhaul, but more a re-establishment of who the brand saw that they were. But all of this rebrand didn't really go down very well on social media, with many people, myself included, preferring the old name over the simplified. They were a bit late to the trend of simplifying their name, and many just didn't see the need for it. And yet, for all intents and purposes, it made a statement and it got eyes back on the brand from people that probably hadn't looked at the company twice in recent years. Especially the H&M collab was really successful. It also worked as great promotion for the launch of the Rabanne makeup line that was released in 2023, which according to the Straits Times saw net sales of its leading Rabanne label surpassing €1 billion or $1.46 billion. Even my patrons over on Patreon completely raved about the quality of the makeup line in a way that really makes me want to try it myself because I haven't yet. So financially, the company was doing well. It was making enough money through its perfumes and cosmetics to fund the fashion side, just like the old days. And because of the H&M collab, people were really talking about the brand once again. However, this didn't really last, and in my opinion, there's one thing missing in all of this rebrand that can explain that. And that is a very clear point of view. If they were to ask me, I think they can probably fix this with merchandising. Because to me, if I go onto the website, if I look at the shows, I can see about 4 distinct characters all under the same brand, which causes the confusion. So firstly, I would start with mood boarding who the brand is trying to portray that it is, and making sure that the catwalks and the product offering and all of that align with their vision. Are you producing 60s retro futurism, or are you making tailoring or sportswear? There's just too much going on and it's not cohesive. Why are they selling leggings, zip-up sweatshirts and Cath Kidston-esque florals next to much pricier sequin pieces, but all under the one name? Sure, loungewear probably sells well and has a good margin, but if it doesn't create a world through which you can sell a vision to a customer, then it's having a longer-term negative effect on the value of the brand to the consumer. Really, these things, if they have to have them for profit, should be under a diffusion line label, so as to not affect the brand perception or the world building. This spills over also into their marketing. Currently, they've got a lot of big-name celebrities wearing the pieces. I think the most famous of which is Miley Cyrus in her dental campaign like music video for Nurse, or maybe it was Beyoncé in her tour, both wearing more classic pieces from the brand. But this is very expensive product placement and doesn't necessarily translate into sales because they look like costumes. The average person may buy the perfume from this, but considering the confused product on the site, it isn't enticing the customer to seriously consider buying that zip-up sweatshirt option. So it's a bit of a waste of advertising budget, in my opinion. Instead, if they wanted to continue to be known for this futuristic approach, after they figure out their product selection, I'd like to see them play with AI and CGI in their marketing to really bring a focus to that futurism aspect. They have started this. They took place in 2022's Metaverse Fashion Week on Show Studio, but I'd like to see it a little bit more. Perhaps a filter that we could use to try on clothes at home, or a return of the paper dresses concept, perhaps like these flip-flops I saw on Instagram I think could work, just as the idea of disposable clothing could be an interesting commentary on the current fashion system. As long as it's biodegradable, I think it could go down well. All of this fits in so well with their legacy brand perception and its tech that already exists today. Plus, I'm sure it costs a lot less than paying for all the celebrity marketing they're doing at the moment. So this really is their opportunity to go small metal discs to the wall and deliver us something really unique. In the end, it's been a while since the rebrand, and they've kind of struggled to keep in the zeitgeist since then. It's not horrendous, but it is a bit ridiculous because there is so much potential for novelty. Which obviously, in my opinion, it's because they do lack a point of view, or their point of view isn't as crystal clear as maybe an audience would respond to. But really, I would like Rabanne to do well. I just think they need a good curator or a good merchandiser to bring it all together, and also to stop focusing too much on trying to make a return to their fashion offering. It's unlikely to turn a profit in the short term, and they'd be better advised simply to use the catwalk shows as promotion for the perfume than to actually try to make money from the ready-to-wear. This, of course, isn't to put Dossena down at all. I like so many of the pieces he created, especially in his earlier work. I told you I bought some, I do like it. And let's be honest, all of this confusion is definitely more than the work of just the one person. But I think that the company as a whole could benefit from someone coming in and helping the brand understand who it is trying to be. With that, they can return to the original ethos of the brand, bring back that brand equity, and hopefully sell even more cosmetics and perfumes in order to keep all of this going. To quote Rabanne himself in his memoir Journey, "My concept of fashion is the very opposite of an obligation. Clothes should be a means for the personality to bloom." Thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe. I'm so close to 100,000 that this would just mean the world to me. If you like this but are more interested in cosmetics, I do have a beauty channel over here, and a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, some of whose names are on the screen now. All content used in this video is done so in accordance with the principles of fair use. However, if you have any concerns, please contact me directly at contact@understitch.co.uk.